A little background information on me. I'm studying down at University of Illinois in Champaign. I'm studying animal science with a pre-veterinary concentration. I really like working with livestock, so what I do with that concentration is kind of still up in the air. I'm not sure if I want to be a large animal vet. I would love working with husbandry practices or just living on a beef farm someday. I love horses. I just love livestock in general. So don't ask me what I want to be yet, because I have no idea. But I have a general idea. I, in my name, have about 10 beef cows, and they all live out in Stewart on my grandparents' farm. They have about 200 head of beef cows. So I grew up on a beef farm, so I know a little bit about it. So like Redora said, we've talked about hogs and poultry. We saw some sheep at Butler's and some horses, and we visited a dairy farm. So where's the beef? So here it is. Why is beef produced? Beef cattle are excellent. Having beef cattle is an excellent way to utilize non-tillable land that's not suitable for farming. There's a lot of land out west that we can't farm on. Not a lot of people want to live on it, build homes. But grass can grow on it, so as a result, you can raise beef cattle. And beef cattle can turn roughage and grass into a high-quality protein source that we can use, that we can eat. They're able to eat grass and roughages because they're ruminant animals. And if you're ever teaching about cattle, cattle have 4 compartments in their digestive tract, not 4 stomachs. Everyone says, cattle have 4 stomachs. It's actually 4 compartments. They have the rumen, which is what they're named for, the omasum, the abomasum, and the reticulum. And it all goes through all of that, and eventually turns into manure. But remember, 4 compartments. Beef is also an excellent source of zinc, iron, protein, like I said, and essential B vitamins. And there's certain B vitamins that are only found in meat. And there's really not a good artificial way to supplement those B vitamins. There kind of is, but it's really not the same thing. Taste. I like to think of beef as being the most preferred meat product as far as taste amongst the general public. It's only number 2 as far as meat products being sold in this country to poultry, but people are more willing to pay more money for beef, and if it's only number 2 to poultry, obviously it's very preferred as far as taste goes amongst most other livestock meats. Convenience, especially hamburger, is a very convenient meat product. Half of all meat consumed in this country is eaten as ground beef or hamburger. It's pretty easy to just take a pound of beef out of the freezer and make some hamburger helper or throw some hamburgers on the grill. It's convenient. Beef prices. There's a lot of different things that determine beef prices. As of today, live cattle sold at an auction will go for about an average of $125 to $130 per hundredweight, which means for every 100 pounds that they're, like if you have a 1,300-pound animal, you'll get, do the math, I can't. For numbers' sake, if I had a 1,000-pound animal, I get about $1,300. But normally, you sell them for when they're about 1,350, 1,400 pounds. Here in the United States, we're pretty lucky. We have relatively cheap beef prices compared to the rest of the world. For example, ground beef prices. Here in Illinois, go to a store, you'll probably pay about $3 a pound for ground beef, maybe a little more depending on where you go. And if you think that's expensive, go eat some beef in Taiwan. You'd be paying $11.50 a pound, and that's mostly because we raise most of our beef here. A lot of our beef is American grown, and we don't import a lot of beef here in the States because we don't really need to. So we're definitely at an advantage for that. Other cuts of beef, the prices of that depend on the quality of the beef. That picture right there is a prime grade ribeye steak. And prime is the best grade there is. You can't really go out to a store and buy it. Usually you'll find prime cuts of beef at restaurants. You'll pay a lot of money for a steak that's prime. So that's the highest. Less than 1% of all beef produced is going to be prime quality. And they determine that based on the marbling in the meat. As you can see the like white flecks in between the muscle and a little fat around the muscle. That's what gives it the flavor. Fat equals flavor. The more fat you have, the tastier it's going to be, the more tender it's going to be, and the juicier it's going to be. So if you're trying to get on the lean side of things, you probably don't want a really fatty cut of beef. But if you want a good tasting steak, get the stuff with the fat in it. Choice and select are usually the cuts of beef that you'll see in stores. And standard is more used in soups, and sometimes you see it, but not quite as often.
Are those labeled like that? If I were to go to the store, does it say on there?
Yes.
Prime or choice?
Yes, they'll say USDA. Normally, like at Schnucks, I've seen choice or select. Choice is the better of the two. Now, the beef industry is pretty, the cycle is pretty self-explanatory. You have a cow is a calf. You can either keep the calf for breeding stock, or you can take it to a feedlot, which is the next step. Raise the animal, feed it out until it gets to market weight, slaughtered, sent to a packer, sent to a retailer, then you buy it and then you eat it. So that's just a very watered down version, obviously. Cow-calf operations. Most cow-calf operations are a part of, they live on pasture. Most of them live on big pastures, and you wouldn't see cows and calves on feedlots, obviously, because you're not raising them for meat. The gestation period of a cow is about 283 days, give or take a couple days, depending on the breed. It's 9 months. It's the same as a person's. And most calves are born around here, at least, in February, March, kind of in the colder months. And they get to feed off their mothers for 5 or 6 months. It's not like dairy cattle like you saw yesterday, where the calves are taken from the mother and fed in hutches. But the calf gets to feed off the cow for 5 or 6 months because we're not using beef cattle milk. We don't need beef cattle milk. So after 5 or 6 months, the calf is weaned. So usually around here, October or so. And the calf can either be kept as breeding stock, it could be a replacement heifer. For older cows, it could become a bull, but less than 1% of male animals become breeding bulls. So as a result, the ones that aren't put into breeding stock are used in feedlots. And feedlots are larger scale yards that house any number of, it could be thousands and thousands like they have over in Oklahoma, or 15, which is mostly what you see here. We don't have as many cattle as people out west. And here is where they are fed out to market weight. Okay, nutrition. Yes? How long does it usually take to get to market weight? Usually from the time they're weaned, about a year, maybe less than a year. It depends on if they're corn-fed or grass-fed, which we're going to get to. Yes?
Okay, so the feedlot cattle, are they the ones, are they still with the mom for 5 to 6 months?
Yes, they are with the cow for 5 or 6 months, and then they get weaned off the cow, and then they start eating corn. And when they take them away from the cow and usually put them right on a feedlot at that point.
Jacqueline, do feedlot producers, do they get the same pressure as Pro Valley Eggs for space per animal and and it doesn't, you don't seem to hear that quite as much. You know, there was all those concerns about how many chickens are in the cage and everything. And in reality, this is kind of just a larger scale of that operation.
Exactly.
But I don't hear the same stigma.
Yeah, definitely. Because I'm not really sure why that is. There are confinement barns for feedlot cattle where they don't go outside, they're kept inside. Most feedlots have a lot of them have some shelter and then a place for them to walk outside. Because cattle are kind of animals that need to move around and they're social. I'm not really sure why they're not as pressured because they are kept a lot of them at once. They're not as aggressive as other animals as well. Like they're not cannibalistic like chickens and pigs.
Well, yeah, the feedlots, and I just know because I've driven by there several times, so in Oklahoma, of which you speak, those feedlots are huge. I mean, it is astounding, not necessarily in a good way, how many head they have in these feedlots. And they have got a lot of animals crammed into very small pens. I mean, there really isn't much room. It reminded me of the chicken thing, only on a beef size. I mean, there are a lot of cattle in those pens.
Yeah, in reality though, they do have room to walk around. I mean, there could be 100 on one lot, but they're not able to move at all. And cattle are creatures that like to be together anyways. You don't usually see them all spread out. They're herd animals. So as long as they're healthy and they're producing, then they're content. You know?
Is there a purpose? I mean, obviously it's more convenient for the producer to have them on a feedlot. They're all in one location. They're easier to feed. They're easier to watch. They're easier to monitor. Is there anything to the idea of by confining them to some extent, they gain weight faster? I mean, less exercise meaning faster weight gain? Is there anything to that, or?
Well, cattle are kind of slow. They don't really when they're calves, they like to run around and be calves, and they get the chance to do that. But when they're older and they get heavier, they kind of just like to lay around. And they'll walk around and stuff, but they don't really have the need to
They don't have that desire.
But they still will, and they have the chance to do that. And keeping them on a feedlot is, I guess you could say, it does make them grow faster because they have access to the feed and they
have nothing else to do but eat.
Basically, and that's all they want to do. That's all.
Okay.
That's what it's in their head. Yep.
Just to elaborate on that, they're probably not a stigma because even if you go out west, you still have ranches that are huge, and they still cover a lot of different area, or a lot of area. So that's might be the why you don't hear that so much. I mean, if you go out west, there are huge farms, huge ranches, cattle that are just roaming.
Yeah, and those are usually the cows and their calves.
Yeah.
The feedlots are the market animals.
Yeah.
So they get pasture time at some point in their life, usually, and they get turned out on a dirt or concrete lot. So it's not cruel. The cattle every group of cattle I've seen on a feedlot, they're not really scared or unhappy or unhealthy. They're content. They're chewing their cud, So
The only time they're unhappy is when the calves come after they've gotten meat from there.
yeah, and then
They cry
go
all
loud
night, and they bawl all night.
yeah.
I was awake many nights listening to calves bawl.
Okay, so nutrition. Corn is the highest energy feed source for livestock animals. It's got a lot of protein and it helps cattle gain weight faster. And it gives meat that juiciness that you get and the marbling in it. And it's because it has so much energy, it's good for lactating cows who need the extra energy to produce milk for their calves. We talked about corn silage a little bit yesterday at Hunter Haven. That's when they chop up the whole corn stalk, corn and everything. They put it in a silo or pit silo or in bags and let it ferment a little bit. And then they feed it to cows in the winter when they can't graze on pasture land where there's no grass. And we've talked about DDGs and corn gluten. Those are also different types of livestock feed. I have a couple of things I can pass around. This is just straight field corn. You don't feed just straight field corn to calves. Usually you have a mixture of a lot of different things. This is our ground feed. It looks kind of janky, but because I got it off the ground. I didn't want to get the fresh stuff, but this has everything in it. It's got the whole cob, it's got little flecks of protein in it, and it's got the corn. So pass those over here. This is
When they use the term corn fed, it's not straight corn. It's still like a ration
Yes.
with the appropriate roughage and supplements and everything.
yeah, and well, here's some oats. Usually there's some oats, there can be beet pulp, and cattle for the most part, whether they're on the feedlot or out grazing, and if they don't have enough grass, the farmer thinks, they're always provided with hay. Almost 24 hours a day, cattle have hay to eat. It's a good filler. It gives them energy when they're not eating corn. Cattle just like to eat all the time. They're just always chomping, you know. Cattle almost always have hay. Pasture land. Feeding cows on a pasture is definitely the cheapest way to maintain and feed cows. It's about 50 cents a day on average. Here in Illinois, it only takes 1 to 2 acres of grass to feed a cow and her calf a year, 3/4 of a year, so roughly 3/4 of a year, like late spring, most of the summer, early fall. If you get somewhere like Texas or where there's not as much grass, it could take up to 70 acres to feed one cow or calf. So it just depends on the landscape where you are. And hay is a little more costly, but it's definitely necessary to feed hay, especially in the winter when there's no grass. And it's easy to harvest here. You can put it in round bales, stick it in a feeder, and cattle have had it and last them a couple days, depending on how many cows there are. So they estimate about $2 a day to feed each cow for hay, grass, and stuff.
I think most beef farmers raise their own hay.
Yeah, the larger scale ones out west, they buy all their own feed. They just have people who are specialized in buying feed, buying hay. Most people around here bale their own hay and raise their own corn and feed their own animals. Okay, grass-fed versus corn-fed beef. This is kind of a hot topic, and it's a market that is based solely on consumer preference. The grass-fed beef market kind of stemmed out of personal beliefs and taste preference. Grass-fed beef, it is true that grass-fed beef is leaner, but that's because it takes twice as long to raise a grass-fed animal as it does a corn-fed animal. And you're not feeding them corn, so they're not getting fat as quicker, and they're not going to have the marbling, and they're not going to have quite the juiciness, but it is leaner, and it is kind of a healthier kind of meat. And since it is older, age brings on toughness of the meat, so it tends to be a little bit tougher. And because it takes longer, it's a little higher priced. Corn-fed beef is what gives it the juiciness, like I said. There's more marbling, the taste is a little more preferred amongst people. And since it's a younger animal, mostly, it's going to be more tender. And I don't remember exactly what Tamara Nelson said the other day, but she said something like, if we had to feed this whole country on grass-fed beef, we would basically have to clear out the whole Midwest and make it grassland. So it's not really sustainable, but there is a market for it, and some people prefer the taste and the fact that it's leaner. And those are just pictures side by side of the one with the more fat is the corn-fed beef. The other one is the grass-fed beef. You can see it doesn't have as much fat. It's a little darker, which means it's a little bit older. The size, it's just the way it's cut. It doesn't really
Jacqueline,
matter.
would it be accurate then to think that your prime cuts are probably all corn-fed?
Yeah.
So I mean,
But
the ones we go to that was your top, right, prime?
yes, prime is the best. If you're going to go get a steak from a regular old steakhouse, it's going to be corn-fed unless it says something like grass-fed beef. And you know, I'm not really sure how they grade grass-fed beef because it's not my forte. But I'm guessing there is probably a way that they have different types of quality for grass-fed beef. So that'd be a good thing to look up.
you mentioned that it was 2 times as long to raise a grass-fed. So would that be about 2 years then?
Yeah, so from the time they're weaned, it takes about 2 years to raise.
Do they, like, are there different areas, like, that geographical areas that grow more grass-fed versus corn, or just?
You know, I'm not
Or
really
is it
sure.
just kind of mixed together?
I'm guessing a lot of the grass-fed markets would be kind of more in our area. I've seen a couple in Indiana, but I'm not really 100% sure, to be honest.
Okay.
I think the correlation is going to have something to do with terrain, because you have to look at the land and the profitability of the land itself. Around here, it's probably going to be more profitable to use our flat, rich soil to raise crops than to raise animals. But if you get into northwest Illinois, where you were yesterday, where some of that land is just not very tillable or too steep, but still produces good forage, you're going to see more livestock, whether it's grass-fed or whether it's cow-calf operation. So it's going to be very terrain and climate dependent.
Right, and here in Illinois, we're not a huge beef-producing state. Like, we have such rich land that most of our land we're not going to use for pasture for cattle. We're going to use it to grow crops. So the average beef farmer here has about, the average is 15 head of cows, and that's your steers, whichever they choose to raise. And they're mostly in it for the hobby farming, and just something to do on the side or an extra form of income. It's not, Illinois beef farmers, it's not usually their main source of income. They're also selling corn or other sorts of crops or livestock. Everybody's heard of Angus cattle, right? Angus, certified Angus beef. Angus cattle are all black, and they were brought over here from Europe in the 18th century. They're great mothers, and they're a very popular breed of cattle. They have good muscling. Certified Angus beef is kind of a topic I like to talk about. It's mostly a great marketing tool for the beef industry. Because the truth is, if you're eating, if you get a steak that has the label Certified Angus Beef brand, chances are it probably wasn't 100% Angus animal. The rule is it has to have 51% black coloration. So excluding dairy cattle, they're not going to take dairy cattle and call it certified Angus beef, obviously. But you can have an all-black crossbred or a 75% black crossbred, or there's a couple other black sort of cattle, and they can be certified Angus because that black coloration is Angus influenced, because Angus is black. But there are Angus cattle that do go into this brand, and I don't know, it's just a really good marketing tool, and it provides the consumer with a consistent product because most of it is based on the quality of the meat and not the kind of animal it came from. Most animals that are raised for meat are not going to be purebred. Most of them are crossbred because you get different hybrid vigor to, if you cross them, you'll get certain traits that purebred animals don't have. So it's a great product. It's going to be a high quality product, not always 100% Angus. Actually, most of the time it's not an Angus animal. Hereford cattle, I don't know if you've ever seen Hereford cattle. They're the brown cattle with the white faces and the white bellies, and usually they have a white tail. Almost always they have a white tail. They're a very calm breed of cattle in general. They're good for 4-H projects, first-time 4-Hers. They're also good mothers.
What is cold?
Oh, cold means they're born without horns. Because you can have horned Herefords, and there are also cold Herefords. And usually if you're in a show, they have classes for both of them. And most of what you see around here, most of what I've seen, they're born without horns. But they also do something called spurring, which is where they cut the horns off. a risk, they're kind of dangerous.
What breed do you have?
I mostly have shorthorns, which I'm not going to have time to talk about. They're red and white cattle. Shorthorns, I have an Angus cow, and me and you, it's a French breed. There's a lot of different kinds of cattle. Mad cow disease. I'm not a fan of this phrase because it's has a very negative connotation, and it is kind of a scary thing, but it is something that is very overly dramatized in the media. The technical term is bovine spongiform encephalopathy, and it is caused by a mutated protein prion that occurs in the brain and causes dysfunction and deterioration. It's similar in nature to the disease in people that we talked about.
Creutzfeldt-Jacobson
Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, and I actually looked that up last night. And the scare of it is that if a person eats the contaminated animals, that they will get the Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, which is the same thing. It causes dysfunction, it causes deterioration. But there has not ever been a case like that. There's never been a reported case of this happening. So there really is no proof to say just yet that that will cause that disease, that eating contaminated nervous tissue of a beef animal or contaminated beef animal will cause that. In the late 80s, cattle were fed meat and bone meal, and so this is what caused the problem to start with, because over in Europe they would have a contaminated animal, they would take the meat, and then everything else that they didn't use, the bones, the blood, the nervous system, they would grind it up and they would feed it back to cattle. And the way that cattle get this disease is by eating the contaminated nervous system of another animal. You can't get it from eating the meat, it's just if you eat the brains or the nervous system. So after all that happened, they decided to not allow ruminant animals to eat meat and bone meal after that, so it's been 9 years since they've done that.
And Oprah, like, ruined it for everybody for a while.
Yeah. Don't listen to celebrities, they're not experts.
Yeah, you don't.
That's a whole other lecture, but as far as mad cow disease goes, I want you to know that U.S. beef is safe. The system is basically foolproof. Harvard says there's a 99.99% chance that there will never be a contaminated animal in our food system ever. And even at that, even if there was that 0.001% chance that it did happen, we don't eat brains and spinal cords here in this country, so that wouldn't even matter. And we also don't really need to import a lot of meat, like I said, so risk countries, import meat from there. I'm going to try to move along because I think I'll talk briefly about E. coli. Basically, if you cook meat to 160 degrees inside and out, you're going to kill all the bacteria, even if it was hopefully not an E. coli infested piece of meat. If you cook it all the way through, it's going to kill everything. You're totally fine. E. coli doesn't come generally from the animal itself. It comes from improper handling, processing of the meat, people not being clean. That's why it's really important to cook your meat all the way, and when you're handling raw meat, to wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Clean all surfaces that come in contact with the raw meat. That's why we do all these things. Now, I'm going to kind of end on like a less serious note, because this is what I like to do. I show cattle. That's me up there. And this animal in particular was the grand champion market steer at the National Western Stock Show this year in Denver in the winter. And I wanted to point that out because in the auction they have down there, they auction all the grand champions. This animal sold for $106,000.
Is that yours?
No, it's just someone else not rich. Yeah. What's that?
I thought one of those could be you.
Yeah, the
bottom
the top one isn't even. No, I don't wish I was in there, but it's showing showing cattle is mostly a hobby. You don't really profit from it. It's just a good way to get out and show your breeding stock or show your market animals. I brought a couple little things. This is a pedigree of one of my shorthorn cows. She won Grand Champion Heifer at the Sandwich Fair a couple years ago. I was kind of happy about that. Her name is Darla. You can find that.
You still have her?
Is that a
Mhm.
term?
Yep.
And then did you breed her?
Yep. I AI most of my. I don't do it personally just yet. I mean, I'm going to learn how to, but a lot of our cows are AI'd. This is
And
a
that stands for?
artificial insemination. You get semen from preferred bulls or really good calving ease bulls for first-time heifers so that it's easier for them to have the calf their first time. There's a lot of different reasons why we AI. It's safer on the cows. This is a rope halter. This is mostly for everyday use of showing. Put it on them and it's got these knots. They're not just there for fun. When they're put on the animal right, it's a pressure point. Kind of helps you when you're breaking calves to lead. If they're kind of stubborn, it kind of helps them walk a little better. This is a pretty clean one. Probably new. This is a show halter. This is what you would use in the show ring. I don't know if you can see, but they have these on. It just looks nicer. This is usually a chain, but I put that wrap on it so that it doesn't rub up against the chin and it's easier on my hand. But they look a little nicer.
Can you pass this around?
Oh, yeah. Surely. This is my last year showing. I'm getting old. This is my last year 4-H. And it's kind of sad, but I really enjoyed it while it lasted. This is a show stick. You can probably see in the picture that they have a show stick and that little boy has a show stick. And this is when you're showing the animal. This hook is for scratching their belly. It keeps them calm when they like it, or you scratch their brisket, and they really like that. And then the pointy end is for helping set up the feet. So you'll poke them like right in between where their deep claws, their splitted toes separate, and that kind of gets their attention and makes them move their feet around to stand the way you want them to. I could pass this around if you guys are careful. Yeah. I think it's totally capable. This is just a comb our cattle, I brush them a lot, and make their hair look really nice. This is just one of the many, this is one of the many different products we use when we're fitting cattle. For black cattle, we spray their legs white so that we can take the clippers and see where we're going really well, because it's kind of, it sounds crazy and it kind of is. We make them look perfect. So, and this is just another sort of show thing. You spray it on them. This isn't really for in the ring, but I use this every day. It's like a conditioner, and it makes their hair look shiny. It makes them smell good because they don't always smell very good.
Like before a fair, you wouldn't do this all the time, just before you're getting ready for a fair?
Actually, every day you go out as early as you can, and before it gets hot, and you rinse them or wash them, depending on how dirty they are. You rinse your calf, you blow them dry, you comb them. Some people, I'm guilty, go as far as putting them in an air-conditioned room to make their hair grow more, because you want a lot of hair. It covers up imperfections, and it's a little pretty. And usually you buy cattle, you buy them whenever, but most people buy them in the fall and early winter, and then you work with them as much as you possibly can to get them tame and get them ready for the show. So it's time-consuming and money-consuming hobby.
Why do you, I think this is what you do, I thought you kind of like wrap their tail and spray it and make it a nice little, like, front looking thing.
Yeah, especially on Herefords, tease their tail and you put it in like a little ball, and I always thought that looked silly. I don't really do that, but it's just like a show thing. It doesn't really matter. You know, it's not going to help you win any better, but
They
it's,
don't grade you better.
yeah,
It's just-
that's just kind of an aesthetic sort of thing. It's kind of traditional for Herefords.
What do they grade you on? I mean, what are they looking for?
They're looking for, it depends on if it's a breeding animal or if it's a steer, market animal. For market animals, they're looking for meat quality, and they can kind of, by looking at the animal's conformation, they can see what the meat's going to be like, and they can feel the side of the animal, they can feel the finish on them, the fat finish, which is what you're looking for. And they look for, they're walking nicely, are they crippled, or, you know, they're looking at for confirmation of meat quality. And for breeding animals, they're looking to see if they're going to, like for heifers, if they have wide hips so they can have calves easily, and animals that are good and hardy to have calves and last a long time.
So of your two pictures that you have there, your picture with your particular pet is breeding,
Yes.
right? So
That's
you're
a heifer.
so you're entered in like one category, like a breeding category. What about the?
That's a market steer.
So they
they're-
paid $106,000 for a steer that they were then going to.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the crazy part. But it's mostly about status, or usually it's a bunch of different people get together, put their money together, and bid on something like this so they can say, oh, I bought the Grand
Sponsorship.
Champion down at Stock Show, you know, when they get their name out there.
Does the boy,
Oh, it's okay.
does the boy get all the money, or does?
I'm sure their parents probably put it in a nice savings account for that number. Someone like that, with an animal that good, is really good at showing and spends a lot of money to buy their animal in the first place, more than likely. So, I mean, I would guess that when they first bought that steer, they probably paid at the least, maybe like $15,000 to $20,000 for it. Some people spend a lot more. So, I didn't spend that much on it, that much money. Otherwise, I would be doing that. Yep.
Do you think, I know like the reproductive, the semen stage is like a huge business.
Yeah.
Do you think that that family probably is in that business? Or
Quite
it could be,
possibly.
or they just buy it?
There's a lot of, I should have brought a magazine, there's different magazines that show different shows, and it's usually the same people winning over and over again everywhere. And there's a couple different families there's one family that is a part of a business that sells the paint products and the show products, and they do like large branches of their family show cattle, and they win a lot. But in general, the people who sell semen and who sell club calves, which are show calves, that's like their thing. They're like an animal broker almost. They don't always raise their own. They buy them from a bunch of other places and they sell them. That's a big part of their business. It's not always their primary source of income. But I'm going to wrap things up. So I just want to say thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something.